At Christmas dinner, my father raised his glass and laughed, calling me a burden in front of everyone I loved. What he didn't know was this. The papers waiting in my bag would cost him his house. Christmas always smelled like cinnamon and old wounds. The table was long, polished, crowded with food meant to signal abundance: roasted turkey, glazed ham, bowls of mashed potatoes swimming in butter. Laughter bounced off the walls of my childhood home like it always had, loud, performative, slightly forced. I sat at the far end of the table, same seat as always. The one closest to the kitchen, the one farthest from my father. "Emily," my Aunt Carol said brightly, handing me a basket of rolls. "You look tired, sweetheart." I smiled. The kind of smile women learn early, the polite one that hides everything. "Just work," I said. That wasn't entirely a lie. I was tired of proving myself, tired of shrinking so others could feel larger, tired of being the quiet daughter in a family that rewarded volume and dominance. Across the table, my father laughed. A booming, confident sound that filled the room effortlessly. Frank Collins, 62 years old. Self-made man, according to him. Patriarch. Provider. The man everyone feared disappointing. The man who had never forgiven me for existing on my own terms. To family, he announced, lifting his wine glass. The people who stick around no matter what. Everyone raised their glasses. Everyone except me. I hesitated just for a second too long. My father noticed. His eyes flicked toward me, sharp and assessing, like I was a misplaced item in his home. "Emily," he said, voice carrying. "You going to toast, or are you still mad at the world?" A ripple of laughter passed through the table. Heat crept up my neck. "I'm not mad," I said quietly. Frank chuckled. "Could have fooled me." He stood up then. Always did when he wanted attention. The chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. "You know," he continued, swirling the wine in his glass, "Christmas makes you reflective. Makes you think about investments." Some people laughed again. My stomach tightened. "Some investments pay off," he said, eyes still on me. "Others just sit there, costing you money, time, energy." Silence began to spread. "And then," he smiled, "there are burdens." The word hit the table like a dropped plate. My aunt gasped softly. My cousin shifted uncomfortably. My mother stared down at her napkin like it held the secrets of the universe. I felt it then, that familiar hollowing out in my chest. Frank tilted his head. "No offense, sweetheart, but not everyone is built to carry their own weight." Someone laughed, nervously. My hands clenched beneath the table. I had carried myself since I was 19. Paid my own tuition, worked 2 jobs. Sent money home when my mother got sick, money my father never acknowledged. But none of that mattered, because I didn't fit his image. I hadn't married rich. Hadn't given him grandchildren. Hadn't asked for his approval. And in Frank Collins' world, independence looked like defiance. "Well," he said, lifting his glass higher, "here's to family, even the ones who need a little extra support." The room froze. All eyes drifted toward me. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears. This was the moment. The moment I had rehearsed in my mind 100 times, standing up, screaming, throwing my wine in his face. Instead, I did something else. I smiled, slowly, calmly, and reached into my bag. No one noticed at first. They were too busy watching Frank bask in his own authority. I pulled out a folder, plain, brown, thick. My father frowned. "What's that?" I stood. The chair legs made the same scraping sound his had made moments earlier. "Just something I need you to sign," I said. Confusion flickered across his face, then irritation. "Now?" He scoffed. "At Christmas dinner." I met his eyes, steady, unflinching. "Yes," I said, "now." The room held its breath. I hadn't always planned to confront him. In fact, for years, I planned the opposite, to stay invisible. Growing up, silence had been my survival. Frank Collins ruled our house like a boardroom. Emotion was weakness. Questions were challenges. Love was conditional and often withheld. When I was 12, I brought home a report card with all A's and 1 B. He stared at it for a long time. Then he looked at me. What happened here? I tried, I whispered. He handed it back without another word. That night, I learned something important. Nothing I did would ever be enough. By 16, I stopped trying to impress him. By 19, I left. College was freedom and terror wrapped together. I worked mornings at a diner, nights at a bookstore, weekends tutoring kids who reminded me of myself, quiet, overlooked, desperate to be seen. I didn't ask Frank for help. Not when tuition rose. Not when my car broke down. Not when my mother's medical bills started arriving in thick white envelopes. I helped her quietly, secretly. She knew. She always knew. Don't tell your father, she'd whisper. It'll just make things worse. She was right, it always did. When she passed away 3 years ago, Frank barely cried. Just stood stiffly at the funeral, accepting condolences like a man closing a business deal. Afterward, he said to me, "She worried about you too much." As if that was the problem. And yet, despite everything, part of me still wanted peace. Still wanted one Christmas where I didn't feel like an unwanted guest in my own family. But Frank had a gift for turning hope into humiliation. Back at the table, my hands trembled slightly as I opened the folder. I could feel eyes on me, judgment, curiosity, discomfort. "What is this?" my father demanded. I slid the papers toward him. "Documents," I said evenly. "You've been asking me to contribute more, haven't you?" He blinked. "What?" "You said last Easter that since I don't have a family of my own, I should be helping this one more," I continued. "That I owe you." My voice stayed calm. "That was the hardest part." "Yes," he said sharply. "And?" "So I did." His brow furrowed as he skimmed the first page. Then the second. Color drained from his face. My uncle leaned closer. "Frank, what the hell is this?" My father snapped. I folded my hands in front of me. "It's the purchase agreement," I said. "For the house." The room erupted. "What do you mean, purchase? Is this a joke?" "Emily," Frank shot up from his chair. "You don't own this house," he barked. "I do." I inhaled slowly. "You did," I corrected. "Before the second mortgage. Before the missed payments." Silence crashed down like a wave. "I bought the debt," I said. "Legally, quietly, months ago." My father stared at me like I was a stranger. "You're lying," he said. "You don't have that kind of money." "I do," I replied. "Because I planned. Because I worked. Because I didn't waste it trying to impress people who never valued me." His hands shook as he flipped through the pages again. "This says," his voice cracked. "This says I have 30 days. Yes." My heart pounded, but I didn't stop. "And this," I said, tapping the signature line, "is the option to stay, rent-free, if you sign." Confusion warred with rage on his face. "Why would I sign?" he demanded. I looked around the table. At the faces that had laughed when he called me a burden. Then I looked back at him. "Because," I said softly, "I'm not the burden you think I am." The room was completely silent. My father's authority so absolute moments before was crumbling. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. The silence after I said rent-free didn't feel like peace. It felt like the moment before a storm makes landfall. When the air gets too still, too thick, as if the world itself is holding its breath. My father's eyes moved across the pages again, faster now, like if he read quickly enough, the truth would blur into something harmless. "You're trying to humiliate me," he said at last, voice low and shaking with restrained fury. I kept my hands folded on the table, calm on the outside, because I'd already done all my shaking alone months ago in empty apartments and late-night parking lots. "No," I said softly. "I'm trying to end this," Frank scoffed, but it wasn't the confident sound everyone knew. It was smaller, cornered. "End this," he repeated. "You think you can end me?" My uncle cleared his throat. Frank, maybe. Stay out of it. Frank snapped without looking away from me. My cousin Rachel, 25, still young enough to believe family meant safety, looked between us like she wanted to grab a blanket and cover the whole scene. Aunt Carol's lips parted, then closed again. She was one of those women who has spent her whole life adjusting her words to avoid angering men. It showed in the way her shoulders pulled inward. My father jabbed a finger at the papers. You're telling me you bought this house? I nodded. The note, the debt, the lien, all of it. That's impossible, he said. This house is in my name. I exhaled slowly. Names don't matter when payments stop. My father's jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle twitch. Who put you up to this? He demanded. Your little lawyer friends? That boyfriend you never talk about? Is this some feminist stunt? The old Frank tried to resurface, loud, dismissive, insulting enough to reclaim control. But the room had changed, because for once he didn't have the upper hand. No one put me up to it, I said. I did it alone. I watched him stare at me as if he was seeing me for the first time, not as his daughter, not as an inconvenience. As a threat. Emily, my aunt whispered, Sweetheart. Why? I looked at her, at all of them. Because they deserve the truth too, if only so they'd stop making excuses for him in their heads. Because I'm tired, I said. Tired of watching him hurt people and call it love. Tired of being the family joke. Tired of hearing him talk about me like I'm a bill he regrets paying. My voice was steady, but something hot and old moved behind my ribs. You didn't pay for me, I said, looking at my father again. Mom did, with her health, her peace, her silence. My father flinched. Not because he felt guilty. Because I had said my mother's name like it was a weapon. Don't drag your mother into this, he hissed. I held his stare. Then stop acting like she didn't exist. The room went colder. My father's hands hovered over the papers as if they were burning. He pushed them away like they might infect him. I'm not signing anything, he said, rising again. Then you have 30 days, I replied. He leaned forward, eyes blazing. You think you've won something? You think you'll walk out of here and everyone will clap for you? I didn't answer, because the truth was, I didn't want applause. I wanted freedom. I wanted the part of me that still flinched when his voice rose to finally relax. And I wanted justice, not revenge that destroyed everything, but justice that finally put consequences where they belonged. My uncle took the papers then, cautiously, like he expected them to bite. Emily, he said slowly, reading a line then another. This is real. My father spun toward him. Give me that. My uncle didn't. He just looked at Frank with something like disappointment. You missed payments, he asked. Frank's face went crimson. It's none of your business. But it was their business. Because Frank Collins had built his whole identity on being untouchable. The provider, the man who never failed. And the truth was that he'd been bleeding money for years. Not because he couldn't earn, because he couldn't stop proving. The new truck every 2 years. The fancy charity dinners where he made big pledges and bigger speeches. The renovations that never ended because Frank believed a home should look like a magazine cover, even if it bankrupted you. He had chosen image over stability. And when it caught up to him, he didn't humble himself. He hid it. My cousin Rachel's eyes widened. Uncle Frank. Is this why you've been so angry lately? My father's gaze snapped to her, and she shrank immediately. The whole family had been trained to shrink. I stood there, feeling something odd, not triumph, not joy, just clarity. This wasn't about a house, it was about power. And Frank had been spending power like money his whole life. Now he was out of both. He reached for his glass, drank too much too fast, then slammed it down. This is my house, he said again, but it sounded more like begging than declaration. My house. My rules. He looked at me, eyes hard. If you do this, you're dead to me. There it was. The sentence he had used on me in 100 different ways since I was a kid. If you disagree, you're ungrateful. if you leave. You're selfish. If you don't comply, you don't belong. A lifetime of conditional love packaged as morality. I swallowed. For a second, my mind flashed back to being 8 years old, sitting on the stairs, listening to him tell my mother she was too soft on me because I cried when he yelled. I remembered her voice after, quiet, exhausted. He doesn't mean it, Emmy. But he had always meant it. And so did I. I'm sorry you feel that way, I said. My father's face contorted, part rage, part disbelief. Like he couldn't comprehend that the words didn't crush me. You're not sorry, he spat. No, I admitted. I'm not. He pointed toward the door. Get out. A hush. My Aunt Carol's hand flew to her mouth. My cousin's eyes filled with tears. My uncle opened his mouth, then closed it again, as if the family's decades-long habit of silence wrapped around his throat. My mother used to tell me, choose your battles, Emmy. But she'd also whispered once near the end when she thought I was asleep. I wish I'd been braver. That memory sat in my chest like an ember. I picked up my bag, and I walked. Not rushing, not trembling, just walking away from the table, away from the smell of cinnamon and old wounds, away from Frank Collins' kingdom built on fear. Behind me, I heard a chair scrape. I heard my father's voice tight, furious. Let her go, as if I'd ever been something he held with care. Outside, the cold slapped my cheeks. The night sky was clear, the kind of winter darkness that makes lights look warmer than they are. I stood on the porch for a moment, letting the air fill my lungs, and then, for the first time in a long time, I cried, not because I regretted it, because it hurt anyway. I didn't drive home right away. Instead, I sat in my car with the heater running, hands on the steering wheel, staring at my reflection in a dark windshield. My phone buzzed, one message, from my cousin Rachel. Rach, are you okay? Please say you're okay. I stared at it. Another buzz. From Aunt Carol. Carol, Emily, your dad is furious. But, is it true? Did you really buy the house? And then, one I didn't expect. From my uncle. Uncle Ben, call me when you can. We need to talk. I didn't answer immediately, because part of me was still the girl on the stairs, waiting for the punishment to come. But the punishment didn't come. Not that night, not in the way it used to. Instead, the consequences began to unfold differently. 2 days later, my father called. It was early morning. I was at my tiny kitchen table, laptop open, coffee cooling in the mug I kept forgetting to drink. His name on my screen made my stomach tighten. I answered anyway. Hello. Silence. Then his breath. You think you're clever, he said, voice low. I closed my eyes. What do you want, Dad? The word dad tasted strange. He never sounded like one. I want to know how, he said. How you did it. I opened my eyes. I read the public filings, I said. I saw the default notice. I asked questions. I got help with the paperwork. What help? He snapped. Legal help, I said. Nothing illegal, nothing shady, just professional. He exhaled hard. You don't have money like that. I rested my fingers against the mug, feeling the warmth. You'd be surprised what you can save when you stop paying for other people as pride, I said. Silence again. Then, suddenly his voice softened. And that scared me more than his yelling. Emily, he said, this is ridiculous. We can fix this. I can make things right. I laughed once. Quiet. Bitter. You don't even know what's wrong, I said. His voice tightened. This isn't about emotions. This is about property. No, I said, firm now. This is about control. And you're losing it. A pause. You want an apology? He asked finally. I didn't answer right away, because the truth was, yes, not for the house, for everything. For every time he cut me down and called it parenting. For every time he humiliated me and watched others laugh. For every time he dismissed my mother's sacrifices as weakness, but I knew him. Frank didn't apologize. Frank negotiated. So I said the only thing that mattered. I want you to sign, I replied. He hissed, almost like he'd been burned. And then what? He asked. You'll throw me out anyway. My gaze drifted to the window, to the bare tree branches outside, reaching upward like desperate hands. No, I said. If you sign, you stay, rent-free, for a year. That's the agreement. A year, he repeated, suspicious. A year, I confirmed. And in that year, you either learn how to treat people, or you live with the consequences of not learning. His voice sharpened again. You think you're teaching me a lesson? I leaned back in my chair. No, I said quietly. Life is teaching you, I'm just the messenger. Then I hung up. My hands shook afterward, because standing up to him wasn't one dramatic moment. It was 1,000 small moments where fear tried to reclaim its place, and I refused. That afternoon, I met with my attorney, Maya. Her office was clean and modern, warm lighting, soft chairs that made you feel like you could breathe. Maya was in her 30s, sharp-eyed, and calm in the way people are when they've seen worst-case scenarios and survived. She looked over the documents again. Everything is airtight, she said. Your father can bluster all he wants. He can threaten. He can tantrum. But he can't change the paperwork. Can he sue me? I asked. Maya's mouth quirked. Anyone can sue anyone, but winning? That's different. I swallowed. He's good at making things messy. Maya nodded, understanding the part I didn't say. He's good at making people feel small. If he tries anything, she said, we respond. But so far, he's mostly doing what bullies do when they finally meet a boundary, testing it. I rubbed my palms against my jeans. He called me a burden. Maya's expression softened. I'm sorry. I stared down at my hands. The crazy thing is, a part of me still wants him to love me. Maya didn't laugh. Didn't shame me for it. That part of you is human, she said gently. But don't let it run the show, I nodded. And in that moment, I realized something. Buying the house wasn't the revenge. It was the boundary. The revenge, if you could call it that, was making him face the reality he'd spent his life denying. You can't treat people like disposable and expect them to keep showing up for you. That night, my Uncle Ben came to see me. He'd never visited my apartment before. When I opened the door, he looked uncomfortable, like he stepped into someone else's world. Hey, kiddo, he said quietly. I stepped aside. Come in. He sat on my couch, glancing around at the cramped space, the mismatched furniture, the smallness of my life compared to the big house he'd always associated with family. It's nice, he said, and it sounded like he meant it. I poured him coffee. We sat in silence for a moment. Then he cleared his throat. Your dad's been telling everyone you're having some kind of breakdown, he said. I didn't react. Of course he is, Ben sighed. He's scared, Emily. I looked at him. He's not scared. He's angry. Anger is fear's suit of armor, Ben said quietly. That surprised me. Ben wasn't a poetic man. He was practical, quiet, the kind of person who had always stood beside Frank and let Frank shine. Or dominate. Why are you here? I asked. Ben rubbed his hands together. Because I need to know. Is this really what you want? To take his house? I stared at him. It was never his, I said. Not really. Ben frowned. You know who paid the down payment? I asked. His eyes shifted. I watched him, and I knew he knew. Mom, I said. Ben swallowed. Your mother. My mother used her inheritance, I said. Her father's money. She put it into that house. And Dad acted like he built it with his bare hands. Ben's face tightened. I found the bank records, I said softly. She paid more than half of it. And when she died, he acted like everything belonged to him. And she left behind nothing but memories. Ben's shoulders sagged. Emily, he murmured. Do you know what she wrote in her journal? I asked. He looked up sharply. You read her journal? I didn't mean to, I admitted. But I found it. After the funeral. And in it, she wrote that she wanted the house to go to me. But she was afraid he'd fight it. Afraid he'd turn the family against me. Ben's eyes watered, just slightly. She loved you, he whispered. I nodded. I know. Ben sat back, shaking his head slowly. Your dad's going to lose his mind when he finds out you know that. He already has, I said. Ben stared at the coffee mug in his hands like it might ground him. So you did this for her, he said. For her, I confirmed. And for me. Ben's voice dropped. He's going to come after you. Not physically, but socially. He'll poison people. He'll make you the villain. I shrugged, even though my throat tightened. I've been the villain in his story since I stopped obeying, I said. At least now, I have the truth. Ben was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I should have stood up to him years ago. The words landed heavy. I looked at him. Why didn't you? He swallowed hard. Because it was easier not to. Because he was loud. And everyone else was quiet. My chest ached. Ben stood slowly, then reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out an envelope and set it on my coffee table. What's this? I asked. Ben's eyes met mine. It's your mother's, he said. She gave it to me years ago, told me. If anything ever happened to her. To make sure you got it. My breath caught. I opened it carefully. Inside was a folded letter, yellowing slightly at the edges, and beneath it, a copy of a document, a will supplement, not filed, not notarized, but written in her handwriting, my mother's handwriting. I held it like it was fragile glass. Ben's voice was rough. I'm sorry I waited. I was scared. Of him. Of what he'd do. I blinked hard. Thank you, I whispered. Ben nodded once. Whatever happens next, I'm on your side. That sentence, it cracked something open in me. Because for once, it wasn't just me against Frank Collins. For once, I wasn't alone. My father didn't sign the papers, not after Christmas. Not after the phone call. Not even after Uncle Ben's quiet defection. Instead, Frank did what men like him always do when they're cornered. He went to war. He started with the family. I learned that quickly because Aunt Carol called me one morning, voice trembling. Emily, she whispered, your father says you're extorting him. I closed my eyes. Of course he does, I murmured. He says you're trying to punish him because you're bitter, she continued. He says you've always been jealous of him. I laughed one short, humorless sound. Aunt Carol, I said, does that even make sense? She hesitated. I don't know. He's very convincing. That was the problem. Frank wasn't just abusive. He was charming. He knew how to make other people feel important till they stopped serving his ego. He knew how to tell stories where he was always the hero and everyone else was either a supporting character or a villain. And in his story, I was the villain now. After Carol's call, my cousin Rachel texted me screenshots of a family group chat I hadn't even known existed. Messages poured in like poison. Emily's being ridiculous. She's always been dramatic. How could she do this to her own father? Frank did so much for her. Maybe she's mentally unstable. I stared at the screen until my eyes blurred. It hurt more than I expected. Not because I needed their approval, but because I had spent my entire life trying not to be the reason the family was uncomfortable, and still, somehow, they chose discomfort over truth. Rachel sent another message. Rach, I'm sorry, I tried to defend you. They shut me down. I typed back, you don't have to fight them. Just don't believe him. A few minutes later, Rach, I don't. I believe you. I exhaled shakily. One person was enough to keep me from collapsing into the old narrative that I was alone because I deserved to be. Then Frank escalated. He called my job. I found out because my supervisor asked to see me, looking uncomfortable. Emily, she said gently, we got a strange phone call. A man claiming to be your father. My stomach dropped. What did he say? I asked, voice too tight. She hesitated. He implied you might be under stress, that you might be making erratic decisions. My face burned. I'm so sorry, I said quickly. He's trying to retaliate. My supervisor sighed. I assumed as much. But I needed to ask. I nodded, throat thick. I understand. She studied me. Are you okay? I wanted to say yes, but the truth was, I was walking through fire with gasoline on my skin. I'm handling it, I said. She nodded slowly. All right, just keep your personal situation from spilling into work. I left her office with my heart pounding. Frank had always been able to reach into my life and mess it up just enough to remind me he was still there. Still looming. Still dangerous. That evening, Maya called me. Frank's attorney contacted me, she said. My chest tightened. He hired one. Yes, she replied. And they're requesting mediation. I leaned against my kitchen counter, pressing my fingers into the edge until it hurt. What does that mean? I asked. It means he wants to negotiate, Maya said. Or he wants to delay. I laughed bitterly. He's trying to run out the clock. Possibly, Maya agreed. But here's the thing. The deadline doesn't care about his feelings. 30 days is 30 days. Unless he challenges it in court, and even then, he won't, I said. He hates court. He hates public loss. Maya paused. Emily, do you want to go to mediation? I stared out my window at the darkening street. Part of me did. Because mediation meant sitting across from him, seeing his face, hearing his voice, and not folding. It meant proving to myself that I could stand there and stay steady. But another part of me, the part that remembered my mother's words, knew this wasn't tea about my strength. It was about strategy. I'll go, I said. Maya exhaled. Okay, we'll prepare. The day of mediation, the air felt metallic, like rain was coming, even though the sky was clear. Maya met me in the lobby of a sleek office building downtown. Her heels clicked against the marble floor, confident and measured. You ready? She asked. I swallowed. No. Maya's gaze softened. That's fine. We do it anyway. In the conference room, Frank was already there. So was his attorney, a thin man with a too bright smile and eyes that didn't warm. My father stood when I entered. For a second, the old fear tried to climb up my throat, but then I saw his hands. They were shaking slightly. Good, he wasn't a king here. He was just a man in trouble. Emily, he said, voice controlled. Sit. I took my seat without answering. Maya sat beside me like a shield. The mediator began speaking rules, structure, neutrality. Frank didn't listen. He stared at me. And then, when the mediator asked him to explain his position, Frank's lawyer smiled. My client feels blindsided, he said smoothly. He believes this transaction was manipulative. I kept my expression blank. Frank leaned forward, eyes narrowed. You did this to hurt me. Maya spoke calmly. My client exercised a legal right to purchase a note in default. Frank's jaw clenched. He turned back to me. You think you're so righteous, he said, voice lower now. You think you're better than me. I didn't react. Frank's eyes glinted with anger. Do you know what people are saying about you? He asked softly. That you're cruel. That you're heartless. There it was, his favorite weapon. Public shame. I met his gaze. Do you know what people said about me at Christmas dinner? I asked quietly. His expression flickered. They laughed, I continued. Because you trained them to, you called me a burden. And you enjoyed it. Frank scoffed. Oh, don't be dramatic. It was a joke. My voice stayed calm. It wasn't funny. For a moment, something flashed across his face, almost like regret. Almost. Then it vanished under pride. Frank leaned back and smiled. Cold. You know what I think? He said. I think you planned this because you couldn't get a man to marry you, because you're lonely. And you needed to feel powerful for once. The words hit like a slap, my throat tightened. I wanted to lash out, to scream, to say, "You're the reason I spent half my life thinking love was something you had to earn." Instead, I did what I trained myself to do. I breathed, slowly, and then I said, "Sign the agreement." Frank's smile cracked. "Or what?" he asked. I leaned forward slightly. "Or you leave," I replied. And the world finds out the great Frank Collins couldn't keep up with his own bills. His attorney stiffened. Frank's face went pale. The mediator cleared his throat. "Let's keep this productive." But Frank wasn't listening, because he knew I wasn't bluffing. And that terrified him. "You wouldn't," Frank whispered. I held his stare. "I already did," I said. Silence. Frank's hands clenched on the table. "You think the house is the point," I said quietly. "But it's not. The point is, you don't get to hurt people and call it tradition." His jaw worked like he was chewing on rage. Then, very softly, he said something that chilled me. "If you don't back down," Frank said, "I'll make sure you lose more than a house." Maya's voice sharpened. "Is that a threat?" Frank smiled, thin and ugly. "It's a promise." The room went cold, and in that instant, I realized something important. Frank wasn't just trying to win. He was trying to punish me for daring to stand up. He couldn't handle consequences, so he would create chaos. Maya leaned toward me, murmuring under her breath. "We're done here." I stood. Frank's eyes widened slightly. "Emily," he said, voice rising, "sit down." I didn't. I looked at him one last time. "You had your whole life to be my father," I said quietly. "You chose to be my judge." Then I walked out, and behind me, Frank Collins' voice echoed in the hallway, furious and loud. But it didn't sound powerful anymore. It sounded desperate. Frank Collins moved fast. That didn't surprise me. Men like him always do when their image is threatened, because speed gives the illusion of control. What surprised me was how sloppy he became. 2 days after mediation, Maya called me just after dawn. "Did you authorize a lien release?" she asked, voice sharp. My stomach dropped. "No, what?" "Frank's attorney filed paperwork claiming the debt was settled," she said. "It's fraudulent." I sat up in bed, heart hammering. "Can he do that?" "He can file it," Maya replied. "He just can't prove it." Relief and anger tangled in my chest. "So what happens?" I asked. "What always happens when someone lies on legal documents," she said calmly. "We expose it." Frank's promise wasn't subtle revenge. It was panic. He'd assumed wrongly that I'd hesitate to escalate, that I'd be too afraid of family backlash, too exhausted to fight. But the thing about surviving emotional neglect your entire life is that when you finally stand up, you're already used to pain. I wasn't backing down. The next week unfolded like dominoes. The bank responded first. They flagged the false release. Then the county clerk. Then Frank's attorney, who suddenly stopped returning his calls. Maya forwarded me an email marked urgent. "Your father's financial disclosures don't match prior filings." I stared at the screen. "What does that mean?" I asked when Maya called again. "It means," she said carefully, "that once someone looks closely at one lie, they often find others." Frank had always treated rules like suggestions. But paperwork doesn't care about charisma. And once scrutiny started, it didn't stop. Unpaid property taxes surfaced, undisclosed loans, a business account he'd quietly drained to prop up his lifestyle. Things he'd buried so deep, he probably believed they were gone forever. The family started calling again, but now the tone had shifted. Less accusation, more confusion. Aunt Carol called first. "Emily," she said, voice strained, "Frank says the bank made a mistake." I closed my eyes. "Did he tell you they flagged fraudulent filings?" Silence. "I didn't think so," I said gently. Then Uncle Ben called. "He's in trouble," Ben said quietly. "Real trouble." I stared out my window at the bare winter street. "I know," I replied. "He's telling everyone you're behind it," Ben continued. That you set him up. I laughed softly, not amused, just resigned. Ben, I said, if the truth destroys him, I didn't build the truth. Ben exhaled. I told him that mattered more than he knew. The letter from my mother stayed on my nightstand. I hadn't read it yet, not because I didn't want to, but because some truths deserve the right moment. I sensed it was coming, and I was right. The call came on a Thursday afternoon. From Frank. I almost didn't answer, but I did. Emily, he said, and his voice was different now, smaller, frayed. They're auditing me. I leaned against the counter, steadying myself. I know. You told them, he accused weakly. No, I replied. You did, with your paperwork. Silence crackled between us. I need you to fix this, he said. The words felt surreal. You want me to lie? I asked. I want you to withdraw, he snapped, then softened immediately. Please, please. I'd waited my whole life to hear that word from him. And now, it meant nothing. You had 30 days, I said. You chose threats. I was angry, he said. You provoked me. I closed my eyes. You humiliated me at Christmas, I replied quietly. In front of everyone. And when I stood up for myself, you tried to destroy my job. That was intentional, I cut in. Just like everything else. His breath hitched. You don't understand what this will do to me, he said. To my reputation. There it was. Not remorse. Fear of exposure. I understand exactly, I said. Because I've lived with the consequences of your reputation my entire life. Another pause. Then, softly, almost inaudible, he said, What do you want? I looked at a letter on my nightstand. I want you to sign, I said. And I want the truth acknowledged. What truth? He asked, wary. That Mom paid for the house, I replied, and that you erased her. Silence. Longer this time. That doesn't matter, he said finally. My grip tightened on the phone. It matters to me, I said. And it matters to her. She's gone, Frank snapped. What good does it do now? My voice went cold. You don't get to decide that. Another breath, heavy. If I sign, he said slowly, you'll help me. I chose my words carefully. If you sign, I said, I won't interfere, but I won't lie. And I won't protect you from consequences you earned. He swallowed. I don't have a choice, he murmured. No, I agreed. You don't. He signed the next morning, quietly, no audience. No speeches. Just his name on the line, shaking slightly. The house was legally mine, but the real turning point hadn't arrived yet. That came 3 days later. At a family gathering Frank himself requested. He called it a conversation, but everyone knew what it was. Damage control. The family gathered in the living room, the same room where Christmas lights still blinked faintly, half forgotten. Frank sat in his old chair, smaller somehow, less certain. I stood near the window, my bag at my feet. My mother's letter was inside. Frank cleared his throat. We need to address misunderstandings. No one spoke. Rachel sat beside me, close enough that our arms touched. Solidarity. Aunt Carol folded her hands tightly. Uncle Ben stood near the fireplace, jaw set. Frank gestured toward me. Emily has taken legal action. I lifted my chin. I exercised a legal right. Murmurs spread. Frank raised his voice slightly. She's done this out of spite. I stepped forward. No, I said. I did it out of truth. I opened my bag, pulled out the envelope. Frank stiffened. What's that? He demanded. My mother's letter, I said. The room stilled. You don't get to read that, Frank snapped. I do, I replied. She wrote it for me. Ben spoke then. She asked me to give it to Emily. I unfolded the letter, hand steady. And I read. My dearest Emily, if you're reading this, it means I didn't protect you the way I should have. I was afraid of conflict, of being alone, of what your father would do if I challenged him. But please know this, you were never a burden. You were my strength. I used my inheritance for this house because I believed in family. I wanted you to have security. Something no one could take from you. If your father tells a different story, he is lying to you and to himself. Be brave where I wasn't. Choose truth. Choose yourself. Love always, Mom. The silence was absolute. No shifting. No coughing. No denial. Frank stared at the floor. Rachel's hand covered her mouth. Aunt Carol cried openly. I folded the letter carefully. This house, I continued, was built on her sacrifice. And she was erased. Just like I was minimized, mocked, called a burden. I looked directly at my father. You taught this family to laugh when you hurt people, I said. That ends today. Frank's voice cracked. I didn't mean. You meant enough, I said. Enough times. I turned to the room. I didn't do this to punish him, I said. I did it to stop the cycle. Ben spoke quietly. He lied to us. One by one? Heads nodded. Frank stood abruptly. You're turning them against me. No, I replied calmly. Your actions did that. For the first time in my life, Frank Collins had nothing left to say. He left the room without another word. That night I stayed behind. Rachel hugged me fiercely. I'm proud of you, she whispered. Aunt Carol squeezed my hand. I'm sorry we didn't protect you. Ben met my eyes. Your mother will be proud, I nodded, throat tight. As I walked out of the house, my house, now I felt something unfamiliar. Not victory. Not revenge. Peace. The kind that comes when the truth finally stands taller than fear. The house was quiet after everyone left. Not the heavy, suffocating quiet of Christmas night, but a softer one. Like a room finally exhaling after years of holding its breath. I stood alone in the living room, the faint glow of leftover Christmas lights tracing the edges of the ceiling. The air still smelled like pine and old furniture polished my mother's scent, somehow preserved in memory more than matter. For the first time, I didn't feel like a guest. I felt like the keeper. I walked through the rooms slowly. Each step carried a memory, some sharp, some gentle. The hallway where my father's voice once thundered. The kitchen where my mother whispered apologies she never owed. The stairs where I learned how to stay quiet, how to disappear. I stopped at the window. Outside, the neighborhood looked ordinary. Cars parked, porch lights glowing, life going on. Inside me, something had finally settled. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel cruel. I felt complete. The next weeks unfolded without drama, almost anticlimactic after the storm. Frank didn't fight the transfer, didn't contest the letter, didn't try to turn the family again. He moved into the guest room, quieter than I'd ever known him to be. We didn't speak much, and that was okay. Because closure doesn't always look like reconciliation. Sometimes, it looks like distance that no longer hurts. One morning, as I was leaving for work, I found an envelope on the kitchen counter. No name on it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. I was wrong. That was it. No explanations. No justifications. No demands for forgiveness. Just 4 words. I sat down at the table, my table, and let myself breathe. It wasn't the apology I once dreamed of, but it was enough. Spring came slowly. The house changed with it. Light filled the rooms in ways I'd never noticed before. I painted the walls, rearranged the furniture, donated things that carried too much weight. I planted flowers in the front yard, daffodils, my mother's favorite. Neighbors began to wave when I passed. Some stopped to chat. The house, once a symbol of control, became something else entirely, a place of warmth, of boundaries, of truth. Rachel visited often. We cooked together, laughed, talked about things we'd never been allowed to say out loud. Aunt Carol joined once, bringing old photo albums. We found pictures of my mother smiling, really smiling. Not the careful smile she wore around Frank, but a free one. She loved you so much, Carol said quietly. I know, I replied. And for once, that knowledge didn't ache. One evening months later, Frank knocked on my door. He looked older, smaller. May I? He asked. I stepped aside. We sat across from each other in the living room. The same room where power once lived loud and unquestioned. Now it felt balanced. I'm moving out, he said. I nodded. Okay, he swallowed. I found an apartment. Close by. That's good, I said. He looked at his hands. I don't expect anything from you. I know, I replied, silence stretched. Then he said something I never expected. You were never a burden. I met his eyes. I know, I said gently. But I needed you to know. He nodded, eyes glassy. I hope, he said, voice rough, you live well. I stood. So do I said. When he left, I locked the door not out of fear, but out of finality. And in that moment, I understood the true lesson of it all. Justice isn't about taking from someone, it's about taking yourself back. That night I slept deeply. No nightmares. No rehearsed arguments. No old voices clawing at my mind, just rest. And in the morning, sunlight streamed through the windows of a house built on truth at last.